95% of generative AI pilots fail to deliver. Not because the tools are wrong, because most people skip the one thing that actually matters. You're probably about to make that same mistake. Here's exactly what to understand before you build anything. Wire this up without understanding it, and the workflow breaks quietly. No error message, just wrong outputs landing in the wrong places. This is for anyone building their first AI automation, specifically a freelancer email and lead management pipeline using Gmail, Claude API, Zapier, and Asana. The problem is real. A freelancer handling 30 to 50 emails a day spends roughly 90 minutes on triage, drafts, and task creation, according to time tracking data from tools like Toggle. That's before any actual client work happens. Most people skip one decision that determines whether this workflow holds up or collapses on the second weird email. That's what this walkthrough covers. Here's how this builds out. First, the pre-build thinking most tutorials skip entirely. Then the full pipeline, trigger to output, with real prompts and a real example. Then the one structural decision that separates a workflow worth keeping from one you abandon in a week. One of these steps surprises almost everyone. It's not the AI part. Here's where most first workflows die before they're finished. People open Zapier, pick a trigger, drop in an AI node, and hope the pieces connect. The result is a brittle chain that works once on a clean test email and falls apart on a real one. Before any tool gets opened, two questions need precise answers. What exact input does this workflow receive? Unstructured email text. Inconsistent length? Tone? No predictable format. What exact output does it need to produce? A structured summary, a draft reply, and a task with a due date. The gap between those 2 points is where Claude does its work. Here's the part nobody talks about: defining failure states before you build. What happens when the email is spam? What happens when there's no deadline? What happens when a client sends one vague sentence with no actual request? If you haven't mapped those cases in advance, the workflow either crashes or silently produces garbage and keeps running. MIT research from 2026 puts the generative AI pilot failure rate at 95%. In almost every case, the failure isn't the model. It's that the problem was never precisely defined before the first node was placed. Here's how the actual workflow runs. A new email lands in a designated Gmail inbox. Zapier triggers and sends the full email body to Claude API with a structured extraction prompt. That prompt asks Claude to return 3 things: the core request, any deadline mentioned, and a list of the client's questions. It also instructs Claude to begin its response with spam if the email isn't a genuine inquiry. Zapier reads that output. If it starts with spam, the email moves to the spam folder and the workflow stops. If it continues, Zapier checks whether the deadline field is empty. If it is, a Slack alert fires and the task gets a default due date of the next business day. That conditional alone prevents an entire category of broken tasks. Then a second Claude call fires. It takes the structured summary from the first call plus the original email body and drafts a short reply. Under 150 words, warm but professional, no pricing discussion, with a call invitation. That draft routes to Gmail drafts, not the send queue. Asana then gets a new task: name from the email subject, due date from the extracted deadline, description from Claude's bullet summary. Here's the moment this blindsides you. Claude receives an email where the deadline returns something like the 14th. No month, no year. The Asana due date field expects a full date format. Zapier tries to map it, gets a malformed value, and either errors out or creates a task with no due date. The workflow keeps running like nothing happened. The fix is a Zapier formatter step between the Claude output and the Asana action. If the deadline field doesn't contain a parsable date, the formatter catches it and substitutes the next business day. That single step keeps the whole downstream chain clean. Here's a real example. Incoming email. Hi, I found you through a colleague. I need a logo for my new bakery. Warm and modern. I have a meeting on the 14th where I'd love to show something. Can you work with a tight budget? Do you need a brief? Claude's extraction returns, core request. Logo design, warm, and modern style. Deadline. The 14th, no month or year, flagged for clarification. Client questions. Budget flexibility and whether a brief is needed. Claude's draft reply. Thanks so much for reaching out. A warm, modern bakery logo sounds like a great project. Yes, I work with a range of budgets and would love to find something that fits. A brief is helpful but not required. I can send a simple intake form if that's easier. Would you be open to a quick 20-minute call this week? That's 62 words. Light read, then send. No full rewrite needed. A task that used to take 15 minutes now takes roughly 45 seconds of review. Here's the part nobody expects to be the bottleneck. The prompts. Not the Zapier connections. Not the Asana mapping. The prompt is the logic layer. A vague prompt produces vague output. Vague output breaks every conditional downstream. Test the extraction prompt against at least 4 real email types before wiring anything. A detailed inquiry, a one-liner with no clear ask, a promotional newsletter, and a calendar invite. Claude's output needs to be consistent enough for Zapier's filter logic to act on it reliably. Keep the 2 Claude calls separate. One for extraction, one for drafting. It's tempting to combine them to save API calls. But if something breaks, you'll have no way to tell which step failed. Separate calls mean each step is debuggable on its own, and never set the draft email step to auto-send on a first deployment. Route everything to Gmail drafts. That single decision is the difference between a bad prompt sending 30 awkward client emails and catching the problem early. If you're starting today, build this version first. Step 1. Create a dedicated Gmail inbox and connect it to Zapier as the trigger. Step 2. Add a single Claude API node with the extraction prompt. Summarize the email, extract the core request, and deadline. Flag spam. Step 3. Add a filter that stops the workflow if Claude's output starts with spam. Step 4. Add an Asana action that creates a task using the subject line as the name and the extracted deadline as the due date. That's it. No draft email step yet. Get triage and task creation working cleanly first. Then layer in the drafting. Test with 3 real emails. 1 genuine inquiry, 1 newsletter, 1 vague one-liner. And check that all 3 route correctly before adding anything else. Most people stop at the build and never refine the prompt. After running this on real emails for a week, the extraction prompt will need at least 1 update. An edge case will appear the original version didn't handle. That's not a flaw. That's how prompt engineering actually works. The prompts here are a starting point, not a finished product. The workflow that survives is the one that gets iterated on. The reason most AI workflows get abandoned isn't the model or the tools. It's that the problem was never defined precisely enough to survive real messy input. Define the input. Define the output. Map the failure states. Build the safety steps. Keep the prompts separate and testable. That's what holds this together. Once the lead intake side is working cleanly, the same logic. Structured extraction, conditional routing, AI drafting applies directly to invoicing and project update workflows where the failure modes are even more expensive and the time savings compound fast. That build is exactly where this system goes next.